Thank you for having me. My name is Shelby Smith and I am the owner of Gyn N Eat Crickets, and I've been raising bugs and convincing people to eat them since 2018. I grew up here in central Iowa on my family farm where we've raised corn and soybeans for my entire life. My dad was a dairy farmer growing up. January 1st of 2018, I sent both of my parents an article about a woman raising crickets for human consumption, and I said, hey, I think I can do this. And then 10 days later, I bought my first 10,000 crickets and said, I guess I'll try it. My first crickets were 2-week-old crickets, so at the time I had no concept of what size those would be. And then it was very well taped up. And at the time, I did not understand why it was very well taped up, but again, I didn't know what 2-week-old crickets looked like at that point. As soon as I cut that tape, there were little crickets everywhere. They can get out of the tiniest space because they're teeny tiny. Currently, I have 2 million that I raise personally, and that's 2 million crickets every 45 days. So it's only about a 45-day life cycle, so we're turning a lot of crickets very quickly. Crickets are very temperature sensitive in terms of the way that they develop, so if you don't have those ebbs and flows and the cool nights along with the warm days, they're going to mature a lot faster. So on my farm, in my barn, where the temperature is controlled and we keep it constant, between 87 and 91 is probably ideal. Max you're going to get out of them, and they're probably not going to be, they're going to be very geriatric crickets by the time you get them to this point. About 55 or 60 days, you'll be lucky to have any crickets that are left that haven't died of natural old age at that point. The big black crickets, those are the field cricket. So what I raise are the common house cricket. There's a couple different reasons that I raise them versus the field cricket. One is that the common house cricket is legal to ship across all 50 states. It's a non-invasive species. Second, I don't know if you've ever stepped on one of those black crickets, but they're pretty crunchy. And the reason for that is they have a very hard exoskeleton. So in terms of pleasantness to eat, they're not as pleasant to eat as my common house cricket. My common house crickets have a softer shell, which is often why they're given to exotic pets as well. So things like bearded dragons and frogs and stuff like that. The softer shell makes it easier for those pets to eat and also more pleasant for humans to eat as well. So the first sign of when it's time to start collecting eggs or the crickets are breeding, chirping is the first sign. So male crickets chirp, it's called stridulation. Many people think it's the rubbing together of the legs, but it's actually the rubbing together of the wings. It's the mating call of the male crickets to try and attract the females. The females, once they are mature enough to breed, so once they have a fully formed ovipositor, which is just this spiky looking thing coming out of the rear end. Crickets hatch from eggs, so it's not like you're live birthing crickets from a mama cricket. Once the females are fertilized, they're ready to lay the eggs. They only need to be fertilized once every 2 weeks, and she can lay fertile eggs for 2 weeks. You just need to give her some sort of substrate to lay her eggs in. So what I do is I give them a cake pan full of moist peat moss, in which the females crawl up there, lay their eggs at, like I said, 5 to 10 eggs per day, sort of a clip. And then after 48 hours, I take that substrate out. We incubate it for between 9 and 14 days, and then those pinheads start to hatch, and then we start the cycle all over again. So brand new baby crickets are called pinheads. They're bright white when they first emerge from the eggs, and then they darken up and turn a little bit of a gray in a couple minutes. Very difficult to deal with in that they are difficult to water. They'll drown in a droplet of water, so getting them access to proper water, nutrition, moisture, all of that is critical in that first week especially. It helps reduce mortality rates if you can get them adequate water and feed. What many people don't realize is that insects are actually omnivores. They eat other insects in the wild. Crickets are similar, so if you don't get them that complete animal protein, that complete amino acid profile, they'll start eating each other and be cannibalistic. So I do a 50-50 blend of that insect feed and then chick starter. They also don't have a fully formed exoskeleton at that stage, so they're at really high risk of drying out. So if you don't have a humid enough condition as well, you can lose a lot of pinheads to it just being too dry. It takes them about that full week to get their first fully formed exoskeleton. And then over the course of the next 45 days, they'll actually molt or shed their skin 7 times as they grow. So it's they're arthropods. So arthropods mean that the skeleton is on the outside. So if you think you or I or any other mammal, as we grow, our skeleton's on the inside and we have stretchy skin on the outside that grows with us. So it's the opposite with these insects. So as they grow, they have to shed that skin. And every time they shed the skin, they are that bright white color again. And they're very vulnerable at that point because they don't have any hard armor. So they generally go into hiding, and then it takes a couple hours and they turn the brown hard color that they are. So harvest, you take everything out, you separate the crickets from the frass. So the frass is what you call the poop. It's a delicate word for the poop. So for every pound of crickets that we raise, we get 2 pounds of frass. They're pretty prolific in that respect. It's a very good natural fertilizer. It's a lot less stinky, it's dry. There's a lot of applications in that respect. Anybody around here who used it last year on their tomatoes, I've had repeat customers for all of those because they had the best tomatoes they've ever had. So there's a lot of other applications. So it could be put on soybeans and things like that. It functions as a natural nematicide because it attracts the bacteria that eats the nematodes. So there's a lot of things to be explored in that realm. Here in Iowa or other places, when the temperatures start to drop, so invertebrates like insects slow down, so they go dormant. That doesn't necessarily kill them. The idea is just for transport, we take them dormant to my processing facility where then they are killed in the freezer. The first step, obviously, like I said, is killing them. So you put them in the freezer to kill them. And then after that, I boil them to make sure that we get them warm enough that we're getting rid of any sort of foodborne pathogens, and then they're dehydrated. So once they're dehydrated, then they have a couple different routes they can go. They can be ground into powder, they can be left whole and seasoned, and then the ones that get ground into powder, those either the powder gets sold as is or we make energy bars out of them. Because we control what they eat, we know that it's safe. We know that it's food safe, so we're not as concerned about it as if you were going to go out in the wild and go try and catch crickets, which I never recommend doing because you don't know where they've been. They may be covered in pesticides, herbicides, any other, especially, in a major ag state, there's a host of chemicals that could be all over them. There's lots of different chemical potential risks for a wild-caught cricket that we just don't have in farm-raised crickets. The other thing is you don't know what they've been eating, so same sort of checklist of pesticides, herbicides, all of that, something that could be harmful for you. So if you're going to do wild-caught, which again I don't recommend, you do need to do some sort of gut clearing period. You have an unlimited food source for predators like spiders and things like that, so that is potentially an issue. The main disease risk that you have with crickets, particularly the house cricket, it's called the cricket virus. It's very, very rare. There's only a couple ways that you can get it, and it's if somebody visits you from another cricket farm that is infected with it, or if it comes in the feed or something like that. Because my feed suppliers are very tightly watched on that and very conscious of it. They have lots of biosecurity in place so that something like that doesn't happen. The risks of getting that virus are very low. But if I did get that virus in any of my barns, and by any of my barns I mean this one or my growers, they would be down for 6 months to a year. It's an airborne virus that you just can't get rid of. The energy bar protein content varies by flavor, but usually it's around 10 grams protein per bar. So the crickets themselves are actually 64% protein by dry weight, so well over double the protein of beef. They have more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk. They're a good source of vitamin B12. They have omega-6s and omega-3s. And then while most people don't necessarily think of insects as animals, they are. So they have a complete amino acid profile with all 9 essential amino acids in a bioavailable form. So they are a very high quality source of protein. Average American accidentally eats between 1 and 2 pounds of insects every year in the food that they eat. So I always say you're already doing it, so you might as well do it on purpose. So our neighbors down to the south in Mexico actually eat over 500 different species of insects, depending on the region. So Western Europe, the US, Canada, those are the main outliers of people that just don't. So most people don't associate the fact that insects are so closely related to other invertebrates that we eat often, like shrimp and lobster. So all insects have chitin in their exoskeleton. Chitin is actually the second most abundant biopolymer in the world behind cellulose. one of those things you don't think about. Chitin is in all mushrooms, so all mushrooms and mycelium, and then all insects, which insects are like the most abundant animal by biomass on the planet. So there's a lot of chitin floating around, but because the chitin is in the exoskeleton, chitin is also in seafood, so there's potential for a crustaceous shellfish allergy. So I have a warning label on the back of all of my products. The population of the world is expected to top 10.5 billion by 2050. In order to feed that entire population from a protein standpoint, current agricultural production is going to need to increase by 70 to 100%. So insects, which again, I'm in a 650 square foot facility. Every 45 days I can turn, 2,000 pounds of crickets out of there. That's a significant resource saved, and a lot of protein produced. So I think that it is definitely the way of the future because, again, I think we take for granted here in the US how abundant protein is, and that just isn't the case in the rest of the world. So eating insects, whether it be crickets, whether it be palm weevil larvae, whether it be mealworms, all of those things are a possibility to help win those protein deserts because they can be raised in a relatively small space with fewer resources. If you want to find out more information, I would invite you to go to my website, which is just www.gymeneatcrickets.com, and so that's GYMNEAT crickets.com. There's lots of resources out there for learning about entomophagy and eating insects, not just crickets, although I'd love you to eat crickets. There's lots of other options out there.